Merenptah explicitly commanded that defeated Libyan invaders be impaled on the south side of Memphis. What's impalation? That's impalation. And that's impalation in Maduneter. The specific reference made. Defeated, those defeated by Kemetic armies, Libyans, Nubians, and so-called miserable Asiatics. They were dealt with in a number of ways. Enslavement being one, we're going to get to that, but also impalation. The chiefs were impaled. Let's go on. Nor was such brutality restricted to the New Kingdom in later periods. On the Nama Palette, one of Egypt's earliest historical or pseudo-historical records, bound prisoners are shown as executed and humiliated, their heads cut off and their penises removed. Now, let's belabor this point. Who knows the Nama Palette? Oh, ain't no students of Kemet in here. Oh, yeah. The Nama Palette is the first document of Kemet. I'm sorry. That's the Nama Palette. The first document we have of historical Kemet, documenting Tasseti's conquering of Lower Nile, Lower Kemet, and the establishment of dynastic Kemet. This is the first document. Now, no, it documents what? Conquest. Black on black conquest. So the earliest Kemetic document is a document of conquest, war. That's the bad. It documents the bad, but also documents the very ugly. Most people know about the Nama Palette, but they don't examine it closely. See? Because on the Nama Palette, the defeated are decapitated. That's how Kemet, dynastic Kemet, opens. Not only with the conquering of the black nation, but the decapitating of the losers. The taking of hands and phalli, penis. Right. The taking of hands and phalli as trophies and as evidence for the body count of the dead is well attested. I'm not going to read it all. I'm going to speed through this. They cut the hands off of their conqueror. And here you have a Kemetic scribe counting the severed hands of Libyans, defeated. The good, the bad, the ugly. The Egyptians, some of this brutality, a lot of this brutality will be directed against Kemet's southern neighbor, Nubia. And be clear, some have tried to separate this from Maya, which is ironic, because when a Muslim tries to say, well, no, that's not Islam, this is Muslim. That's right. They say, no, you're being an apologist. Well, you being an apologist. Both of y'all being apologists, real talk. But there's an effort to separate this brutality from Maya. And those of you who do that show your sheer ignorance of Mahadic civilization. You're very Western in your understanding of Kemet. The whole church separation of church and state thing is completely anathema. It's a complete antithesis of what was going on in Kemet. In fact, the warring and the brutality that was conducted by and on a behest of the Pharaoh god on earth was done as an execution of Maat. There was jihad in Kemet. You hear what I said? What's jihad?
Holy war.
Holy war. Y'all thought that was just a fanatical Muslim thing, didn't you? Jihad, holy war against African peoples. With due respect to Dr. Clark, didn't begin with Muslims. It began with Kemet. Whether recounted on the temple wall or on a private monument, the military records of the ancient Egyptians served a higher purpose. Proof of the triumph over chaos, Ispet, the opposite of Maat. The preservation of Maat was the most basic ideological reason for warfare in ancient Egypt. The preservation of Maat was the most basic reason for warfare in Egypt, because Kemet saw itself as surrounded by Ispet. Foreigners to the Cometians were the personification of the opposite of Maat, Ispet. And the duty of the Pharaoh was to spread Maat and eliminate Ispet. And so the political policy of the state, its warring with foreigners, was the fulfilling of the Pharaoh's duty to spread Maat and eliminate Ispet. So every war was put in a theological context. It was a jihad, a holy war. Egyptian pharaohs were the representatives of the gods on earth. There's a lot of wordiness. No, this one. This is important. For the ancient Egyptians, every stage of war possessed its own appropriate ritual activity. Every stage of war had its own particular ritual activity. Temple release portrayed a god, typically Amun, signaling divine justification for a campaign by handing a scimitar to the pharaoh. Ramesses III, outside his temple in Medinet Habu, Amun is handing him, Ramesses III, the scimitar to conquer his neighbors. Show me, I challenge you, a representation of Allah himself, not only authorizing jihad, but providing the weaponry by which that jihad is to be carried out. I challenge you. Look, the Africans, Nubians, Libyans, and Asiatics, who are the target of the Amun-sanctioned jihad. Let's go on. The first stage. The army marched beneath the banners and ribbons of divine standards as they set out for war. And military texts record that before a battle, a deity could appear to the pharaoh in a dream. During the battle, the pharaoh manifested his divinely inspired strength by smiting the enemies with the divinely granted scimitar. After vanquishing Egypt's foes, the pharaoh rewarded his royal army and presented the enemy prisoners to the god. This is Ramesses III at the Medinet Habu temple, presenting conquered Libyans and Asiatics to Amun-Ra as prisoners of war who will invariably become slaves in the temple complex of Amun. I'm going to get to that in a minute. I challenge anyone to find a depiction of Allah being happily receiving slaves. How then is Allah a slave God, but Amun-Ra is not a slave God? I didn't say he was. I don't say either one of them is. But the duplicity is what I'm calling out. Your double talk. Allah is a slave God because some Muslims took some Africans as slaves. What is my eye? On that logic, on that standard, what is my eye? Here you have the God in recipient, being a recipient of the slave. Let's go on. Much of the booty secured from a successful campaign ended up being delivered to that deity, a situation that meant in practice that Amun's temple of Karnak benefited in no small degree. Prisoners were placed as work slaves. Some of my critics try to say, no, those are slaves, they're prisoners of war. Prisoners of war don't stay prisoners of war. Prisoners of war invariably become slaves. Now, here's the question. I'm in here. I didn't get this on tape for my critics. Is it slavery? If you saw the debate in Baltimore, who saw that debate? We touched on it, ran out of time. We're going to deal with it now. Was there slavery, real slavery in Kemet or not? My bleeding heart critics swear that Wesley's just wrong. That there was no slavery in Kemet. Egyptians didn't enslave them people. They were just indentured servants. You know, like in Europe. It's real. You know. And if you have to be a slave, then indentured servant is the way to go. They say I'm misrepresenting the facts. They say Kemet doesn't even have a term for slave. So this is an episode of Mythbusters 102. Slavery versus indentured servitude. A very good book you should have in your library. 5,000 Years of Slavery. In the early years of Egyptian history, what is known as the Old Kingdom, a form of forced labor called corvée was practiced. The pharaoh owned all the land, so every person who farmed on it was his tenant. When the pharaoh's tenants weren't needed on farms, they had to work on construction projects in exchange for food and clothing. Though they had little choice about the work they did, they weren't slaves. They could own their own homes, and most important, nobody could sell them. But a laborer who tried to escape his corvée work could be punished with enslavement together with his whole family. Please. Mention the whole indentured servitude thing. Not that that did not exist in Kemet. It absolutely did. That's a corvée work. The pharaoh owned the land. Technically the pharaoh, theologically the pharaoh owned everything in Kemet. Everything was in the ownership of the god and his proxy, the pharaoh. Every citizen of Kemet had to spend some time working for the pharaoh, just like every American citizen has to do what besides pay taxes? What? If we're called to serve on jury, every American citizen has to serve on jury. Every Kemetic citizen had to provide, when called upon, some labor on behalf of the Pharaoh. It was short term, is when needed. It was either on the farm, on the temples. That wasn't slavery. That was more like indentured servitude. The pyramids weren't built by slaves, more than likely they were built by corvée workers, part of the rotation. Everybody had a rotation. So indentured servitude, if you want to call it, certainly existed. But see, the problem is, we think that is the breadth and length of involuntary servitude in Kemet. And it absolutely is not. The irony is, if a corvée laborer, when his rotation or her rotation comes to serve, if they go AWOL, what happens? They are enslaved. They are put in prison and forced to work with no cessation, no term on their labor. That was a fundamentally different institution than the corvée labor. But we can go further. In all periods of Egyptian history, military campaigns were the most important source for slaves. Those who weren't killed, decapitated, castrated, had their hands severed, those whose body were kept intact were enslaved. Not corvée labor, slave labor. Kemetic scribes taking a head count of Nubian prisoners of war to be sent to the Temple of Amun for slave labor. Now I'm going to discuss the difference between a slave status and a corvée laborer status, and how that relates to this question of chattel versus non-chattel slavery. Y'all like that? I don't. What it look like? What that remind you of? Yeah, but what's that remind you of? It reminds us of good old Western chattel slavery. Huh? But this from ancient Kemet. It is also clear that some foreign slaves were educated and that they were made to adopt the Egyptian language and culture. The slaves were made to adopt the Egyptian language and culture. Egyptians believed that even slaves could become normal persons if they accepted Egyptian culture. And such acceptance was often expressed by name change. We talk about slave names. We talk about slave culture. Non-Egyptians enslaved by Egyptians. They had Meduneter, our sacred holy language. And yes, I'm not being facetious. It is our sacred holy language. But it's as much of as a slave language as Arabic or other sacred holy language. In that it was imposed on slaves. The Egyptians had the sense of manifest destiny like the white West did. The savages could be symbolized by imposing meiotic culture. That's a reality, man. The good, the bad. Oh, I see some drooping faces. And that's where I'm getting the call. So I'll end there. No, I'm gonna end here. I'm gonna just we're closed on this. There is slavery. I still gonna get to it. I guess. You're right, and make the case. Damn it, there's real slavery in Egypt. Real. I was gonna go through the terminology, the myth that Egypt doesn't have a term for slavery. That's a myth. Egypt has 4 terms for slavery. They all have distinct nuances. We're going to get into the magnetic and bust that myth up and hurt you, bleed the romantic feelings. But I'm going to end on this note. I mentioned that Islam, founded by Africans. It was an African religion when it was founded. A sister religion to Maat. And it's good and it's bad. It was usurped. It was overrun and taken over by whites. And it was taken in a totally different direction. They took the soul out of Islam. And that's what we have today. Well, why would you judge Islam, especially judge its Africanity or not, on the basis of the Aryanized, modified, corrupted version of it? That's like judging Maat by this. Because you see, when whites invaded Egypt, beginning with the Persians, they converted to Maat. And they did the same to Maat that they did to Islam. They manipulate. So here you have Horus with Roman military garb on, riding a horse. Heru in Roman military garb. Heru has been Romanized. The Ptolemies had a synchronization process. They wanted to marry Maat with Hellenism, Greek thought. So the Ptolemies, they assumed pharaohship, they converted to Maat, and then they changed it into their own image. The best example is Serapis, the creation of the Ptolemies. Serapis is a conscious creation, a merging of Asar and Apis, native Maitic gods, but in the guise of the Ptolemies. So Serapis represents the white folks' blending of ours with theirs. Now, who will judge Maat on the basis of Serapis? Who will judge the Africanity of Maat on the basis of what the Ptolemies did in the name of Maat? This is the modern day Serapis. This white Muhammad is the Serapis of today. The Islam of the world today is the Serapis of today. Why would you judge Islam's Africanity on the basis of white folks' manipulation of it?
Let's give Dr. Wesley Muhammad a round of applause. Come on, y'all. Y'all can do better than that. He laid out an irrefutable case here, man. Come on. So I'm reluctant to say, but I guess I have to say, due to the fact that we're all here, we're running out of time. Do anyone have any questions? I mean, anyone have? Yes, sir. What's your question?
Brother DJ from waronthehorizon.com. It's not even a question, it's more of a, well, it is a question. I want to know, when you give this presentation.
Hold on 1 second. I just want to, is anybody else's phone blowing up that Whitney Houston just died?
Yeah.
Oh, because my phone is blowing up, man. I just wanted y'all. Okay, cool. I'm sorry. But go ahead, man.
Wow. My question is, what is the response in other cities and other venues at this level of information, because one of the things that I think you just did was level the playing field in terms of the dialogue that we as African-centered people and Muslims and Islam, that we have to have. We have to be able to level the playing field so that we can dialogue not from a position of superiority or inferiority, because we know and understand now that there were mistakes and bad decisions that were made on both sides. So what is the response from the different audiences and the different venues at your information hotel?
I appreciate that observation and that question. It actually resonates with me. I recently was reached out to by one of our great scholars who's living today. I won't say her name right now. Hopefully it'll be a moot point soon. But the brother whom I greatly respect and who respects me and my work, he reached out to me and said, brother, I understand what you're doing, but people are mad because they think you are disrespecting a master teacher. And he was cautioning me in my approach, because he rightly saw it's not helpful for folks to think I'm disrespecting the master teachers. It does inspire a lot of emotion. The response is very polarized. This side love it, this side hate it. There's no middle ground. I know the way I present it is polarized. I know that. And I'll bring the lean of Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Yosef Ben Yaakov in particular. I don't disrespect them, but I'm very forthright. I don't make blind deference to them. They were wrong at particular points. Bottom line, I love them, but at particular points, especially as it relates to Islam, they were very wrong. They were wrong largely because of the limitations of sources they had available to them. So it's not their fault. I'm mad at them, but they were wrong, and those errors must be corrected, because it happens to be the errors is the springboard of the Afrocentric hate against Islam. It's those critical errors. So I'm very frontal, respectful, but frontal in correcting those errors. And he wanted to pull my coat on that. I understand that. Why do I do it? Precisely because of what you observe. The leveling of the playing field. Keep it real. Afrocentrics been bullying Muslims for a decade.
Yes, sir.
That Kufi smacking, you know why I do the way I do it? That Kufi smacking is done, son. Done, son. Ain't no more Kufi smacking up in here. That day is done.
Thank you.
And see, the field is leveled now. You're absolutely right, because Afrocentrics bullied Muslims and Muslims fell back. Muslims stood down. Because for a while, the perception was that the Afrocentrics had the intellectual advantage. Now we know, and I've exposed it, Afrocentrics have become as religiously dogmatic as Muslims. That's a fact. Afrocentrism is a religion. It's a dogmatic religion. With its myths, its ideology, its prophets, you can't touch all of that stuff. So I am begging in order for the express purpose of leveling the playing field. Can I say things less? Can I present this stuff in a less frontal, offensive way? Yeah, but I don't get down the road like that. Right? This Kufi, I got that Kufi smacking. Every time I'm before, I'm looking for the Kufi smacking. What? Now ain't no more Kufi smacking. And that was my point. And so now we can settle it down. We can be gentlemen about it now. But They weren't gentlemen before I came. Let's keep it real.
Come on, bro.
They weren't gentlemen. See, when Khaled was here, they were with Khaled.
There you go.
Right?
There you go.
They
Talk
rolled
about
with him.
that.
They loved Khaled.
Talk about it.
But, you know, and Khaled was banging with the truth. But they would be right beside him, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they went back to their hood, in their little temple, when Khaled isn't there, they could be smacking. And then when Khaled was taken, oh, y'all went buck wild. Y'all had a field day on Muslims. I'm not naming any names. Y'all had a field day on Muslims, and Muslims fell back. Because for one, you know, they couldn't handle it. Y'all did have the intellectual advantage over Muslims. Shame on you, us Muslims.
That's right.
So I am motivated by that. I'm gonna smack some damn kufis myself. And so now all the kufis off. Let's be gentlemen about it, and we can have a purely intellectual dialogue.
Any more questions? Any more questions? But once again, we want to thank Brother Charles. We want to thank the family here at the Helpful Essence Cafe and Restaurant here. We want to thank y'all once again for coming out. We're trying to reach out to Runoko Rashidi, Dr. Whitaker. I definitely want to get Dr. Whitaker and someone up here to talk about health in a real kind of way. I'm not talking about breaking down the molecular structure of a fucking vitamin. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, oh, excuse my language. I'm talking about real health, man, as it relates to us. Because people, you know, they just look at me and they swear, Griff, you must be a raw foodist, whatever. I'm like, I'm a survivalist, man. I was in line on my way to Russia with Public Enemy. These bastards singled me out and took me in some back room, whatever. Long story short, I couldn't make it into Russia, and I had to stay in Helsinki for 3 days. Yeah, go figure. So I'm in Helsinki not knowing the language. Hell, man, not knowing where to eat, what to eat, not to trying to trust the food, who to trust. You understand? I had to survive.
That's right.
You know, I don't know if you know anything about Helsinki. The sun only goes down for 2 hours. Are you familiar with that? No? Yeah? Well, it's way the hell up there. So imagine trying to go get some sleep and you're hungry. Are you following me? So I had to survive. And, you know, I can tell y'all some war stories about scraping all that stuff off the fish sandwich at McDonald's and going to the store and get some lettuce and some tomatoes and some other stuff to survive. I can tell you war stories for days, man, for real. Being out on the road, having nothing to eat. You understand what I'm saying? Because Flavor Flav made up the rider. And the only thing that's on there is beer and weed and pork. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm saying we have to survive, but we need someone here to talk about real health. You following me? Anyway, not going to belabor the point.